So we always strip off labels. When I do a lot of workshops, I'll say you're not allowed to use any of the terms, make up new ones, and tell me what that means. So we have data harbors, data ranches, data outhouses, data shacks.
Welcome to It's About Data, episode 26. This time we're joined by guest John O'Brien to discuss the universal semantic layer.
Thank you, Matt. We're back here. This is actually really the first episode that had been recorded, I think, post Labor Day. So it's time to get back to work. That's kind of a heavy thought. But do have kind of a pleasant memory here in terms of inviting our guest today, John O'Brien, someone who I've known from the data warehousing, analytics, and now AI space for many years. We're also one of the hosts who welcomed me to Boulder during a vacation that I had, brief vacation I had, during the summer. It was actually some fun memories, as Colorado was my old stomping grounds right after I got out of school. But anyway, John is the principal for Radiant Advisors. He has a deep background, a long background in data warehousing and analytics, as I mentioned, both from the technology provider side and from the implementer side. So we've seen it from all angles here. And when we met and had coffee in Boulder, I found out an idea that he was working on, that he was developing, called the universal or the unified semantic layer. And that's going to be the topic of our episode today. So before we go any further, John, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to develop this concept of the unified semantic layer? And tell me if I've got the wording
right. No, it's a great intro. Thanks. And of course, my career has been very interesting, as it's a blend between being a practitioner and hands-on for many, many decades, being a vendor, like you said, CTO for a database company for many years as well. And then for the last 14 years, Radiant Advisors, we focused on research and advisory services, kind of your fractional enterprise data architect or CTO for a lot of enterprise clients. I always joke that I wanted to go from seeing one company for 5 years and building out their architecture to seeing 5 in 1 year type of mode. So, and we've had in this, framework that we use for modern data architectures, that we help companies put them on a roadmap for their, how do we build this out? How do we modernize to the cloud? How do we implement new technologies and balance the whole ecosystem? We've always had a concept in there we called the data unification layer, as a combination of features we needed. And so I've taken that and said, okay, as I've, all of us have watched AI emerge or basically drop on our space, and then it's plugging through implementations and the realities right now. That's really kind of evolved into, I call it a unified semantic layer. But what I'm seeing is, and we always watch this with our labels in the industry label universal semantic layer seems to be the one that's sticking. And we're going to go with that. We saw this with data lakes, right? Remember data reservoirs, their variations, waited for the dust to settle. We accepted that. And I think universal semantic layer is the term that's going forward. And what's fun about what we do is that working with enterprise clients all the time, we're tackling hands-on problems. And one of the big hands-on problem was, how do we make this LLM or conversational AI work? And so what they found is that, hey, you plug these things in and they're just all over the place. There's security. The last year has been, well, what is the right approach to making this work in the enterprise, right? What are all the factors? What are the frameworks and the steps? And it really just evolved as we get deeper and deeper into trying to make this a reality for companies. So yes, universal semantic layers have just consumed most of my year when it comes to research, and that includes a variety of technologies, and we call it context engineering now, and frameworks, but it just continues to get bigger and bigger as we go forward.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up there, which is that we've had in the past many types of ideas of these grand unification theories.
Yeah.
Going all the way back, if you might recall, to the case days when we were all in diapers. We're talking about the enterprise data model. Yeah. And we've had various iterations and, of course, eventually back, about 10 years ago, Hadoop was supposed to, contain everything. And every time and then we had the immersive data catalogs.
Yep.
But the thing is that I think, and this is one I want to ask you because you're talking about universal, unified. In the past, when we've sort of strove to be that ambitious, to be something that's kind of this universal layer, that we've always fallen short. What's going to be different this time?
Great question. We have. I mean, I remember all of those. I'm very active in data modeling with all of our clients. I mean, that's how abstract do you go? How much do you deliver? So there's whole things about that. But yeah, I mean, go back to what, 2001, I think the semantic layer with business objects, right? Universes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the first, I think, real instantiation of it. What I think is interesting is that for decades, literally, we've always talked about metadata and we've always talked about a semantic layer. It was always a nice to have after the fact when we delivered what we had to get done. And now I think both of those are, it's standing in our way to getting to AI. So it's like we can't make this work unless we go back into our data management world and do the things we've always known that we should have been doing, because that will unlock all of our enterprise context. So I think it's become an issue now because a lot of people recognize that this is the key. If I want to get to AI, I have to do this thing that those guys have been telling me about for years and years to go do. And, it's the same with, and I think the other one you mentioned was data catalogs. I view this kind of as the evolution. To me, we're in the third or fourth generation of metadata, and we're moving from catalogs to semantic layers, which are even richer. So, those are all parts of continuums. It's just right now. I always joke about pain-driven architectures. We
That sounds familiar. That resonates. Yeah.
right? Because otherwise, it's they're always a nice to have, and speed
Right.
comes first, right?
Yeah. So I'll kind of tell a story about pain-driven architectures. From my
Yeah.
perspective, I think there's been an inversion of how implementations happen. So in the 90s, early 2000s, you had to call up a company, Oracle or something, order a database, and then you probably brought in an implementation team. You had to set up all the indexes, all this crazy stuff. And now, with something like a BigQuery or a Snowflake, the basic implementation is a lot easier. But then you have to do this stuff afterward because you discover that there's a lot of pain right away, right? That was my consulting career when I was doing more consulting, is just getting called in to say, why isn't change data capture working? Why are we eating up all of our Snowflake credits for the year in the first month? All this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
does that, I don't know if that
And,
resonates with you.
and there's in what when I joke about this, because I teach it so often about a
Yeah.
pain-driven architecture,
Yeah.
shortest distance between 2 points, your sources and your customers, and then we fill all the pieces until we get something that optimizes data management,
Yeah.
our requirements, data delivery, customer requirements. And I joke that a data warehouse is the last thing you'll ever build. It's because it's the last. We don't receive requirements for that. We
Right.
receive, right, but they are. We know that that is our requirements to deliver well. Data integrity, quality,
Yep.
consistency. But it's not what a customer asks for. So
Right. Right.
yeah,
And they tend to dive in and do it on their own just because you can spin things up without a DBA now. So that creates pain.
well, yeah, and I do go into a lot of companies with implementation firms that jump into the deep end, and I look
Yeah.
at their targets, and I'm like, this is where we do see technologies, cloud native, columnar databases say, hey, if you put everything in one ultra wide table, flatten out the entire structure, we're best at that, but nobody can read that, right? And we're not so. It's yeah, we're always backing up a few notches from what implementation. So there's definitely a data management centric
Yeah.
view, and there's a data engineering centric view, and
Yeah.
striking that balance is always the key. Always the key.
That makes sense.
So I view data engineering as its own sub architecture within
Hmm.
data architectures. Well, I break that in half and focus on. I do a lot of what I consider patterns. So we focus on both data management principles that you want to adopt, and I'd say where are you at on the spectrum on each one of these. I meet intelligent, great, smart people out in the industry all the time that they are going to be one place on the spectrum, and I'll be on a different one. Like I'm pretty big on open. I'm pretty big on polyglot, but others aren't the same. That's fine. So I'll break that down and say data ingestion is one category, and we have maybe 10 or 12 patterns from CDCs to APIs, data management, and then we have a whole set of patterns around transformations. So I like to ingest it. I like to curate the data and get it quality, which is also a little different than industry norm for medallion architecture
Yeah.
definition. Mine's very
Hmm.
what's the value in this layer. So once we go for that, what are your transformations? Do you want to engineer in database, in pipelines? When do you know which ones? Streaming architectures, definitely done a lot of those where you've got, like a Kafka hub in the middle and streaming pipelines. So and then we also implement, in this space, the self-service workflows, right?
Hmm.
Those are transformations from end users that, hey, they may not have a data modeling background or an engineering background, but they get the result and you want to execute that pipeline. So in the transformation world, we have 4 or 5 different primary patterns that we drill into, depending on which tool you want to use. Do you want to be all Python code, or do you want to be proprietary low code, no code tool, or in database, not in database, all that kind of stuff. And having done it for so many years, I've been bit and made mistakes so many times. I learned each one of those when not to do something the hard way, and had to live with my own mistakes for years. So that's part of helping clients not repeat those for sure.
Yeah.
What's really interesting right now, you bring up the medallion architecture.
Yeah,
I've been seeing lots of pieces that basically start to look at it and then trying to extend it to say, well, it really means this, and really talking apples and oranges.
yeah,
And I could really see how when you talk about anything that's like a tier, they could be confused. It could be conflated with the medallion architecture.
Yeah.
You think about medallion architecture is simply data tiering.
yeah,
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
another. I mean, okay, data tiering is traditionally we put it on different physical media, but this is logical data tiering.
right.
Semantics, I would think, and you tell me, but it sounds to me that this is just kind of an umbrella that just basically defines what's the data that we're putting in whatever tier it's in. But
Right.
you tell me, you tell us.
Yeah. So what I think is interesting about Medallion, once again, it's a new label. A lot of people love those, but I look back, we've done 2 tier, 3 tier, 4 tiered architectures for years. Right. We used to call it staging areas. Now it's a
Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
the so we always strip off labels. When I do a lot of
Hmm.
workshops, I'll say you're not allowed to use any of the terms, make up new ones, and tell me what that means. So we have data harbors, data ranches, data outhouses, data shacks. But tell me as somebody, because I go into companies and they're like data warehouse this or ODS that, and
Yeah.
it takes me about 2 months to figure out, oh, what you meant is different than what I think that
Right.
means. But in the tiers, so I think what I look at is a generic tier. We know that we have a data processing lifecycle. We ingest data, it's raw. Who benefits from that, right? What are the semantics needed on top of that to work with that data? Now we're going to curate it. We're going to apply some quality. We're still application centric, application security controls, uh, quality improvements, get a good DQ tool in there, and let the business users drive that. So they're defining those. And now we have good quality ingredients data. Now we have one department that has a set of transformation rules, like a data domain or a certain area or data hub they want to build, subject areas, that's what we used to call them. And then, let them build that with their tools. So for me, that gold tier is everything. What I like separating engineering right down that middle and say those first 2 tiers, let's call them raw and curated, they're application business rules. They have no business semantics, no integration rules. It's once you go to the gold, you'll get somebody's set of requirements of how to integrate this, how to define this, who's going to use that, and we switch to domain usage. So that is a gold because it's certified, it's governed, it's baked into the requirements. You can do all that other work and ingest and make data ready for data products. That's another favorite uh, methodology that's going around these days. But up to that point, it's pretty commoditized. It's straightforward. It's all about technology and acquisition and processing. Then when you get into integration and business rules and semantics, but I do put a semantic layer on top of all the tiers if somebody's going to access it and they need additional information. A semantic layer will go beyond just the technical metadata into here's the relationships between the data, here's the knowledge you need to understand, here are the
Mhm.
semantics within the domain or the ontologies of how this works. And so that's how I treat the different tiers because it has meaning. Because we know 5 years from now, we're going to have a new term or a label floating
Right.
around that everybody's adopting because Medallion's so old. That's, old. Sure, that's coming. So yeah, we drill into kind of those principles and roles when it comes to data architecture.
Got it. So when you say for you, is the gold layer the universal semantic layer, or is that on top of the gold layer?
I put that on top. So one of
Okay.
the things I like about the way I define universal semantic layers is that they sit between the consumers and the data sources. They untangle the complexity of the data infrastructure that we have and make it consumable. Make
Yeah.
it right easy to use, have the definitions because any consumer, whether it's a user, an app, or an AI, what you need is you need that kind of information to help them trust the data,
Yeah.
right? So to me, it's a trust layer. What's the lineage? Who's using it? How many times was this accessed? Right? Who's the author? What are the contracts? All of that kind of stuff builds trust for a user, an app, or AI to consume that information.
So, John, this sounds very much like very much, and I say this as a compliment, a work in progress, because I
Yeah.
think this is the lesson which said a lot of folks in the community are working towards right now. I think you're the first person that's really voiced it as kind of like, really contain this kind of with nice and logically as kind of a universal semantic layer. But of course, Matt and I saw when we were at Day to Day Texas, last winter, and hopefully we'll see you there next year. That context was a big theme, or it was a, I wouldn't say theme, but it was a sub theme that like this is what everybody was talking about, under beneath beneath the surface. So what I want to ask at this point, kind of as our final question, is like, where are you taking this from here, and how can we learn more about this and be part of basically of developing this and delivering this?
Yeah. So that's a big thing we focus on. So today, right, our pain, our pain is in the BI space still. So semantic layers with metric stores, you'll find a lot of the vendors out there will have a metric store. Putting that on top of your own what you've already built for years and you're using, that gets your foot into the semantic layer. Metric stores, it enables this talk to data capability for users. It enables what I call Gen BI capabilities. And now you've got your foot in the door. It also brings in a lot of caching capabilities and multi tool access. So from there, I do focus on the next step being let's look at context engineering. So, what can we add to that? The first thing I usually have enterprises add is a vector database, documents, get good at embeddings, get good at chunking, looking for relevance, because vectors are really good at similarity context. And then once we go to that, then I say, once you've got that kind of mastered, then let's go ahead and start to introduce knowledge graphs because that's a little bit more complex to maintain, harder for a lot of enterprises to adopt. And I think that's the realization that a lot of this doesn't happen overnight in the enterprise, other than prototypes, POCs, and dabbling. But if you really want to productionize this, then that's our third set of context to add. So I look at that from going from BI ready to AI ready as the journey and taking these logical steps. And then I also look at, hey, we're going to enable this kind of conversational chat GPT. So bring in RAG and bring in context engineering to do your LLM and bring in, chat. The next step is if you get really good at that and you start to figure out how am I going to introduce memory? How am I going to introduce which LLM in which place? Then you can start to say, okay, now let's scale this, which is agentic. So now we're going to add, that's advanced to me. This is kind of the
Mm,
year of agentic, where that just means it's all getting kind of reality tested. And so if you get good at something small like your conversational with semantic layers, and then you can start to replicate that, then you have specialized agent after agent after agent. Then you can add that reasoning and that planning and that orchestration model. And then you can start to build out complex systems. So it's really a step by step. I think we're in the year of this. Hey, let's start to figure out agentic, but we're really perfecting last year's RAG. And then I think next year, as we shift, we're going to take a look at multimodal inputs and outputs as kind of being that thing that a lot of people talk about it, but hey, we're still trying to, drink from the fire hose on everything else. So that's kind of how I'm looking at the next couple of years as we flush this out.
Right, and I know you're about to basically I guess sort of publicize basically kind of like a community link, and we'll put that link up in the video here,
Okay.
so that I know that that community is not started yet, but this way, our viewers can find it, can be, can get in touch with you.
Yep.
And learn how to be connected. John, I appreciate your taking the time to basically to talk to us about this developing idea with semantics. Again, it's just a huge, powerful thing that we're seeing. It's again, this is part of what I'm seeing. Like, so as what I was forecasting as being like the renaissance of data in an era of AI. That AI is really placing premium on good data, and key to that is context. So, John, thanks very much for taking the time with us. I think we're going to have to take this. We're going to have to return this conversation next year when we start talking about how agents really muck this all up.
Yes.
I think that's probably right. Yeah, I mean, I can see that we actually probably have 8 hours worth of things to talk about. So we'll have to have you back on sometime soon.
Well, that would give us about 3 years worth of episodes. So we'll just start recording back to back.
There we go. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.